They say love is blind, but high in the Idaho Territory, blindness could get a person killed. Verity Miller learned that truth the hard way, not when she lost her sight, but when the people she trusted most chose to leave her behind. The wagon had been moving for hours, and the sound of its wheels was the only thing keeping Verity calm. The slow creak of wood and the crunch of iron rims against frozen dirt told her she was still traveling, still not alone. She held her walking stick tight in both hands, her knuckles pale from the cold and the fear she tried not to show. Then, without warning, the sound stopped. The silence felt sharp. "Why are we stopping, Arthur?" Verity asked. Her voice was quiet, almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might make something worse happen. "Resting the horses," Arthur replied. His voice came from somewhere ahead of her. It sounded tense, rushed. Verity smelled pine and cold air. The wind cut differently here. She knew somehow that they were high in the mountains. Winter was close. She felt it in her bones. "Get down," Arthur said. "Stretch your legs." She hesitated, but she obeyed. Strong hands lifted her from the wagon. Her boots hit rocky ground, uneven and hard. Before she could ask another question, something heavy was shoved into her arms. Her carpet bag, then a small sack, then a thin blanket. "What is this?" Verity asked. Her stomach tightened. "We can't do it anymore," Arthur said. His voice sounded angry, but underneath it was something worse. Guilt. "Winter's coming. We barely have enough for our own children." Verity reached out, her hand grasping only empty air. "Arthur, please. I can work. I can clean. I can knit. I can help." "You're a burden," Martha snapped. Her sister-in-law's voice was sharp as ice. "We won't watch you starve slowly. Out here, God might show mercy." "God?" Verity cried. "You leave me for the wolves and speak of God?" The wagon creaked. A whip cracked. The horses surged forward. Verity stumbled, fell hard into the frozen ruts of the road, and screamed their names. The sound of the wagon faded, swallowed by the wind. When the ground finally stopped trembling beneath her, she knew the truth. They were gone. She knelt in the dirt, shaking, the cold already sinking into her bones. She had no idea which way led to town, no idea how far help might be. The sun was dropping fast, and the air was turning cruel. Then she heard it, a single snap, a footstep, not wind, not an animal running, something slow, heavy, watching. Gideon Thorne stood still beneath a tall spruce, his rifle resting in his hands. He had watched the wagon stop, watched the woman get pushed into the snow, watched the family ride away without looking back. People were cruel. Gideon had learned that lesson well. For 3 years he had lived alone near the timberline, trading furs and avoiding people. When sickness took his wife and young daughter, he left the world behind. God had not answered his prayers then, and Gideon had not spoken to him since. He told himself to turn away. But the woman did not cry. She knelt in the road, clutching her thin blanket, her head tilted as if listening for hope that would never come. She looked small, broken. Gideon stepped back, ready to disappear into the trees. His boot snapped a branch. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Verity froze. She turned toward the noise, her cloudy eyes wide. She raised her walking stick with shaking hands. "Who's there?" she called. "I have nothing to steal." Gideon stepped into view, his boots crunching against frost. He did not speak at first. He let the sound of his approach fill the air. Verity swung the stick wildly. "Stay back!" A large hand caught the stick mid-swing. The force jarred her arm. "You'll hurt yourself," a deep voice said. Cold, rough, human, but not kind. She let go. Her breath came fast.
"Are you a bandit?"
He laughed once, short and dry. "You're not worth robbing. My family," she said quickly.
"They're coming back."
"They're not," Gideon said.
"I watched them leave."
The wind picked up. Verity shivered hard. "I'm blind," she whispered. "If you leave me here, just tell me which way is south." "South is 20 miles of rock and snow," he replied. "You won't survive it." She fell silent and began to pray under her breath. "Save it," Gideon snapped. "God doesn't live on this mountain." Still, he grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. "Move. The storm is coming." The climb was brutal. He dragged her uphill through trees and snow, never slowing, never offering comfort. Branches scraped her face. Cold burned her lungs. She stumbled but forced herself to keep moving, certain he would leave her if she fell. At last, warmth hit her face. A door opened. A fire breathed. Inside the cabin smelled of smoke, furs, metal, and loneliness. Gideon told her where to sit and laid down rules with no room for argument. She would eat what he gave her, sleep near the fire, leave when the storm ended. The blizzard trapped them for days. Silence filled the cabin, heavy and tense. Gideon barely spoke. Verity listened to every sound, learning his movements, his moods. She felt useless, like a burden again. When she tried to help and broke a dish, Gideon exploded in rage that went far deeper than the accident. His anger scared her, but his pain scared her more. On Sunday, she hummed a hymn. Gideon's fury returned, sharp and sudden. He told her to stop. When she asked why, the truth spilled out. He had once been a preacher. Faith had not saved his wife or his child. To him, God was silence. Verity listened. Then she spoke words that cut deeper than shouting ever could. She told him she was blind, but he was the one living in darkness. Gideon stormed out. Hours later, he returned quieter. He found her mending his torn coat with steady hands. Something in him shifted. He described the sunset to her, purple and gold against the snow. For the first time, he did not feel alone while standing in the fading light. The next morning, he took her outside and showed her the mountain through touch, smell, and sound. She listened. He explained. Together they shared a world neither had truly seen before. But peace in the high country never lasted. That night the wind returned, stronger than before. Gideon drank to quiet old memories. He spoke of the day his daughter died. Verity asked him to remember how she lived instead. He broke down, grief pouring out at last. By morning, the storm had passed. Gideon stepped outside to check the roof. Verity waited and waited. The silence stretched too long. Then she heard it, a groan, somewhere in the snow. Her heart froze as fear closed around her. She opened the door, the cold slamming into her like a wall. "Gideon!" she cried. A weak voice answered from the side of the cabin. He was hurt, and she could not see. She stood at the threshold, knowing that if she stepped into the snow and lost her way, they would both die, but staying inside would kill him for sure. With shaking breath, Verity stepped forward into the storm. The snow swallowed Verity's boots the moment she stepped away from the cabin. Cold bit through her dress and wrapped around her legs like iron chains. The wind clawed at her hair and stole her breath, but she did not turn back. She could not. "Gideon," she called again, forcing strength into her voice. "Keep talking to me." "I'm here," came the faint answer. The sound was weak, broken, but it was enough. She turned toward it, her cane sweeping wide, finding only deep powder. Panic rose fast, hot and sharp, but she pressed it down. She reached back and touched the rough logs of the cabin wall. That was her anchor. Slowly, carefully, she slid along it, step by step, counting her breaths. When she reached the corner, the wall ended. Beyond it was nothing but open ground and deathly quiet. Verity swallowed hard. She lifted her face to the wind and listened. There. A groan. Close now. "I'm coming," she said, more to herself than to him. She let go of the wall. Her foot slipped almost at once, and she went down hard onto her knees. Snow soaked through her skirts, freezing her skin. For a terrifying moment, she lost all sense of direction. The world spun. The wind roared. Then she heard his breathing. She crawled, dragging herself forward, her hands sweeping wildly through the snow until her fingers struck something solid, a boot. Gideon. she sobbed, clutching his leg. He was lying twisted in the snow, his body shaking. His breath came out in short gasps. When she touched his face, it was cold as stone. "My leg," he hissed. "It's broken." Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Vardy forced herself to think. Staying here meant death. She wrapped her hands into his coat collar and pulled. "We're going back," she said. "You hear me? We're going back now." He groaned but nodded. Inch by inch she dragged him, slipping and falling, her arms burning, her lungs screaming. Gideon tried to help, clawing at the snow with his hands, every movement tearing a sound of pain from his throat. At last her heel struck wood. "The step!" she cried. "We're at the porch." With a final desperate effort, they hauled themselves inside the cabin. Verity slammed the door shut and collapsed beside him, gasping. The warmth hit them slowly, painfully. Gideon's breathing was wrong, shallow and fast. She found the bottle of whiskey by memory and pressed it to his lips. He drank, choking, but it steadied him enough to speak. "You have to set it," he said. "The leg, before it swells." "I can't see," she whispered, terror flooding her voice. "You don't need to," Gideon said, gripping her wrist. "You have steadier hands than I do. Pull when I say pull. Don't stop," Verity prayed under her breath. She found his boot. She braced herself. "Now," Gideon shouted. She pulled. The scream that tore from him filled the cabin, raw and animal. Verity bit her lip until she tasted blood, but she did not stop. She felt the bone shift, then lock with a dull thud. Gideon went limp. She froze, her heart pounding, then pressed her hand to his chest. It rose and fell. He was alive. Night fell fast. Verity worked without rest. She dragged blankets and furs around him, building warmth where she could. She tore her clothing into strips and bound his leg tight with split wood, her fingers shaking but precise. By midnight, Gideon burned with fever. His skin was dry and blazing hot. Verity sat beside him, cooling his face with water, whispering to him so he would not slip away. "Stay," she begged softly. "Stay with me." In his fever, Gideon drifted between worlds. He saw his wife, his child. They called to him, smiling, waiting. He wanted to go to them, to rest at last. But another voice held him back. Calm, steady, full of care. He felt a hand on his brow. "Don't leave," the voice said. When Gideon woke, gray light filled the cabin. Pain flared in his leg, sharp and real. He looked down and saw the splints, rough but firm. Verity slept nearby in a chair, her face pale with exhaustion. Something inside him broke open. She had saved him. Blind, shaking, terrified. She had walked into the storm for him. She had done what he could not. "Verity," he rasped. She woke at once, on her knees beside him, her hands finding his forehead. "The fever?" she asked quickly. "Is it gone?" "It's gone," he said. Relief flooded her face. She sagged against the chair, breathing out a shaky laugh. "You pulled me out of the snow," Gideon said quietly, "in every way that matters." The days that followed were slow and hard. Gideon could not walk. Verity became his eyes and his strength. She learned the cabin completely, every edge and corner. She cooked by smell and sound. She chopped vegetables by touch. She kept the fire steady. Gideon watched her with new eyes. One evening, as snow melted outside and water dripped from the roof, Gideon spoke words he had not said in years. "I was wrong about God," he said. Verity looked up, her hands stilling. "I don't know what he is," Gideon continued, "but I know what you did for me, and it wasn't nothing." Verity smiled softly. "Faith is not about answers," she said. "It's about staying when leaving would be easier." Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow pulled back inch by inch. Birds returned. The creek roared with meltwater. Gideon healed, though he would always limp. One morning he told Verity the pass was open. She went very still. "So it is time," she said. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. They sat together in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees.
What do you want, Verity? Gideon finally asked.
She turned her face toward him. What do you want? He took her hand, rough fingers trembling. I want you to stay, he said, not as someone I saved, as someone who saved me. Verity smiled, warm and certain. I will stay, she said. Outside, the last of the snow melted away, and the mountains stood quiet and bright under a new sun. Spring did not arrive all at once in the Bitterroot Mountains. It crept in slowly, like a careful promise. Snow melted in patches, revealing dark earth beneath. The creek near the cabin roared with fresh water, and the air lost its sharp bite. Life was returning, whether Gideon was ready for it or not. Gideon healed, but his leg never fully forgave him. He walked with a limp now, each step a reminder of how close he had come to dying alone in the snow. Verity noticed the change in his stride before he ever spoke of pain. She adjusted her pace to match his without a word, her hand resting lightly on his arm when they walked outside. The cabin felt different now. It no longer smelled only of smoke and old grief. There was fresh bread in the mornings. Coffee simmered on the stove. Verity hummed while she worked, quiet tunes filled with calm instead of sorrow. Gideon found himself listening for those sounds when she was still, uneasy when the cabin fell silent again. One afternoon, Gideon returned from checking his traps and found Verity standing near the table, her hands resting on the wood, her face turned toward the window. You're smiling, he said. I hear birds, she replied. They weren't here before. Gideon looked outside. The branches were alive with movement. He nodded. Spring's won. Verity's smile softened. Nothing stays buried forever. That night, Gideon sat by the fire with a small leather book in his hands. He had not opened it in years. Verity sat across from him, knitting by touch, her needles clicking softly. Would you read to me? She asked. Gideon swallowed. His voice felt strange in his chest, but he opened the book and read slowly, carefully. The words no longer tasted like ash. They felt like something mending. As weeks passed, the mountains opened fully. The path to town cleared. One morning, Gideon came back from the ridge with news he had been holding back. The road is open, he said. Verity stopped moving. Her hands tightened around her cup. Then I should go. The words hit Gideon harder than he expected. I can take you, he said quickly. There's a doctor in town, people who might help. Verity was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. This is home now. Gideon's breath caught. You're sure? She reached for him, her fingers finding his hand with ease. I have never seen more clearly than I do here. He pulled her close, holding her as if the mountains themselves might try to take her away. They were married that summer with no guests and no music, only the wind in the trees and the creek below. Gideon spoke his vows with a steady voice. Verity smiled, her face lifted toward the warmth of the sun. Life was not easy. Winter still came hard. Gideon's leg ached in the cold. Verity's darkness never lifted, but the cabin stayed warm. Laughter replaced silence. Faith returned, not as anger or pleading, but as quiet trust. Years later, travelers spoke of a mountain man with a limp and a blind woman who could describe the forest better than anyone alive. They said the cabin near the timberline always had a fire burning and a door open to those in need. And high in the Idaho mountains, where cruelty once left a woman to die in the snow, love took root instead, not because someone could see, but because someone finally chose to stay.